To help us get started, we've got some special guests with us today. I'd like to take a minute to introduce them. Let's see, earlier you met Chaplain Kallerson. We also, we have some special guests from early in our history and from each chapter. We have Susan Gordon, former executive director. We have Marianne Fons, board of director member. We have Rehbein, former executive director. We also have some speakers and different organizations joining us for the next 2 days. I'd like to introduce Amy Milne, the executive director of the Quilt Alliance. We also have some board of director members here, and if you guys will help me out and stand, and I'll introduce you all. Great, thank you. We have Anne, who is our board treasurer, Anne Rehbein. We have Chris Ham, Jody Inman, Lori Thompson. Let's see, and Anne, you are from Iowa, and these three ladies are from Washington State. We have Mary Kerr, our Mary is our vice chair of the board, and Mary, you're from Maryland, is that correct? Virginia, my apologies, so, yeah. And then Sue? Oh, in the back corner. Sue Wright, our board chair, who is from Connecticut, and I think I got everybody on the board. I'd also like to take a minute and introduce our planning committee. We'll talk more about them as the conference goes on, because this is a very special group that's been working hard for a couple years. But if the committee members can stand, I'd love to introduce you. All right, we have Pat Forshaw from New Mexico, Jackie McKinstry from Alabama. We have Mary Kerr, Sue Wright, and then Ruth Ann Bosworth is another wonderful committee member who was very instrumental in planning this, but was not able to come today due to a family emergency. So we wish her well, and thank you guys for your planning. And it's been an absolute joy to work with you all on this. I'm pretty lucky, in this position in the organization, and that I get to work with many of you in different roles and positions. And it's just wonderful, and you guys inspire me. So, all right. Yeah, let's go ahead and get this started. Very good. Well, as you know, we are celebrating our anniversary. And a big part of that celebration today is honoring our past. And what a past. Oh my goodness. We've mentioned some milestones, memorable moments, and this morning we're really going to celebrate that. We're going to have a retrospective of our first 20 years, and we will have that shared by our special guest. So joining me this morning will be Chaplain Kallerson, Marianne Fons, Susan Gordon, Anne Rehbein, and then we have a special message at the end of that retrospective to share with you all. So, with that, Chaplain Kallerson, I'd like to welcome you to the stage.
Well, good morning. I have a TBI thanks to an Iraqi rocket, so I have to have notes up here, so I apologize. But if I don't, I'll be my Baptist self and I'll go for an hour as opposed to my Lutheran self. Well, congratulations. 20 years. I could not have thought that when I first got that call from Catherine at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I thought that would be absolutely impossible. You see, even though I retired with 34 years in the Army, back then I was actually assigned as the senior Army chaplain clinician, as they called it. Real fancy title at Walter Reed. What that meant was I had 14 chaplains working in the hospital for me, and I had another 8 chaplains who were studying to be hospital chaplains to work for me as well. I don't know of any location that's ever had so many chaplains working in one place, and I had to corral the cats. That was my job. Well, on that first date, when my secretary told me that there was a Catherine Roberts who wanted to talk to me, I immediately thought she was a movie star, mistakenly the wrong name, and I said, boy, that lady's in for a real rude awakening because she's going to talk to an Army chaplain. But Catherine talked to me, and she said she had this quilt that she wanted to donate to a wounded soldier at Walter Reed. And since my wife is an avid quilter, there's over 20 quilts around our house. Right now, she's actually working on a quilt for a newborn grandson coming December. So there's always a quilt in the house. You understand that. But I knew that quilts were over the allowed dollar amount that a soldier could receive as an award or a gift. So I said, well, I got to think about that, Miss Catherine. So I went home and I told Connie, my wife, about that. And Connie said, are you kidding? You just need to go ahead and do it. Take a chance. And so I called Catherine up and I said, okay, I'll take that first quilt. And I had to look it up because I can't remember. And I awarded that first quilt to an amputee from Minnesota. Well, in doing that, that began my relationship with Quilts of Valor. Because anybody that knows Catherine Roberts knows she's very persistent. So it didn't take long after I received that quilt, Catherine called me up and said, would you please take more than one quilt? And I said, well, let me see, I gotta look at this and I have to think about it because now I knew, okay, I'm really gonna get in trouble with the lawyers. But you know, chaplains can do some funny things. Well, it just so happened that as a senior officer, we were called to do VIP escorts. And the VIP escort ladies called me up and said, sir, I'm really sorry to call you, but I need you to come in and do a VIP escort. I was like, okay, whatever, my turn. So I went in. Well, the person that I was going to escort around was Stevie Nicks. You may know her name, Fleetwood Mac. Well, when I met Miss Nicks at the door, she had an assistant that had a large cart. I thought, well, this is unusual, that doesn't happen. And on that large cart were a lot of cardboard boxes. And I was like, what's this? Oh, they're iPods. And they're iPods with all of Fleetwood Mac's music, all of my solo albums, and all the music I like. I was like, oh, Lord, help me. What do I do? Well, what I did was I took her up, and Miss Nicks awarded iPods to all the wounded and sick soldiers. So I didn't know that she liked to do this kind of stuff. When I thought, well, okay, you know what? If the lawyers are going to get me now, I got good company. And I thought, all right. But then I got to thinking, I truly believe I was one of the few people at Walter Reed that knew the cost of time and materials to make a quilt. A lot of the people in the hospital just thought, well, that's a colorful blanket. Okay. They had no idea what it cost to put that together. But you know what? In 4 years of receiving those quilts after that very first one, no one bothered to ask me. I didn't tell them. But about that time, see, I was receiving 3 flights of wounded a week, 70 plus. So I learned how fast quilters can spread the word. Because pretty soon I started receiving all these quilts that Catherine was calling everybody up. And they were coming in all these different patriotic colors. I used to be able to put them on the couch in my office, but then we had an incident happen. That incident was President Bush and Laura visited the hospital. When they came, they offered every soldier to have their picture taken. Well, when they did this, there was a Washington Post reporter with them. And he noticed a lot of the soldiers in wheelchairs were covered with quilts. A lot of them on the beds were covered in quilts. So the Washington Post got permission to talk to me and to take a picture, one picture, in my office. So they took a picture of me on my couch, surrounded by quilts. Because the kid kept saying, "No, sir, get them out, spread them all over you." I was like, okay, whatever. What I didn't know was that picture would go on the front page of the Washington Post. Well, you know what happens when that happens? Soon, my couch filled up. I got a wall locker. I said, "Sergeant, I need a wall locker." "Okay, sir, we'll get you a wall." And the wall locker filled up. I said, "Hey, I need to take over that storeroom." I took over a storeroom, and I filled it up with quilts, because I started to receive quilts after that picture was published. I received them from schools, Girl Scouts, individuals, churches. I received them from small organizations, and then even all of a sudden, the large Gold Star Mothers organization brought 3 vans worth of quilts. Then this fledgling organization that Catherine was putting together, that she would tell me, "I think I like the name Quilts of Valor." And I was like, "Yes, ma'am, whatever. You know, what do I have to say? It's not my place. And I'm quite busy." So I thought, okay. Well, at first, I started to receive 20 quilts a week. And you would think that's a lot, but remember, I get 3 flights of 70, right? So next thing you know, Catherine's like, "That's not enough." The word went out. Before you knew it, I was receiving 300 a month. 300 quilts. Now, I would take these quilts, and then weekly I would go out and I would put them on a cart in between all my other duties. I did have other duties, believe it or not. But back then, what I would do is I would go into the soldiers' room and I would offer for them to pick the quilt out that they wanted, because I had stacks of quilts. And I got them, as I said, from all these various organizations. QOV was sort of fledgling at the moment. Well, one particular young boy, he picked a bright yellow and green quilt. Can you imagine what it was? No, come on. You're not farmers. John Deere. It was a massive John Deere quilt that reminded him of home. And then I had this other quilt. God help me. He will. He doesn't get offended by me saying that. Trust me. I had a bright pink quilt that I thought I would never get rid of. But I had a young lady take that quilt, and I was thrilled. And then I had this kid from Texas, Dallas Cowboys, right? I thought I'd never get rid of that thing, but he picked that quilt. But truth be told is the majority of the quilts that people started picking were red, white, and blue quilts, because word was spreading. Well, when that picture went out in the Washington Post, if you hadn't seen it, it's got a lot of red, white, and blue quilts. So I didn't tell people. I don't know what Catherine told them, but they got the word. And then all of a sudden they went out. And then I had talked to Catherine. I said, "You know, I don't really care what the Army says. I think it'd be really cool if you had a label on the quilts So I would know that they were Quilts of Valor. And it doesn't matter that they put their names on it. Don't worry, the lawyers aren't asking questions. It's okay. And so I did that. Well then, about that time, several of the wounded gave interviews. And when they gave interviews, they all had what? A quilt on their lap of red, white, and blue. So word started to spread. And then I would have other chaplains call me and they'd say, hey, do you know this lady, Catherine, something? And I go, oh yeah, that Quilts of Valor. I said, it's okay. You can work with her. The only thing you gotta be real careful is she's gonna push your envelope about wanting all these pictures that you're not allowed to give out. Don't do it. Before you know it, we had 27 military hospitals giving out QOVs. As we did that, then it continued to flow and flow and flow. Well, my wife, Connie, worked for the General-in-Chief of Staff of Walter Reed, so she went in to work with me in the morning. And as she did that, my youngest daughter also needed all those community service hours that you have to get for high school graduation. So they became my quilt volunteers when I could not go out. And they gave countless hours on the wards giving out the quilts when I couldn't do it. Well, as they did that, Connie was ecstatic as a quilter when she would see that a mother or wife understood what they were and would push the son and the very occasional daughter to help them pick out a quality quilt. And they became mostly the QOVs. Well, as they did that, they had to help because soldiers don't know diddly about quilts. It's a blanket. Well, one day I saw Connie was very excited about one quilt in particular. And I noticed that she put it under the other quilts on the very bottom of the pile. Well, I had to run to an emergency. And I thought, I need to ask her about that when I get back. So when I got back, she was beaming in my office. And I couldn't understand that. She found a wounded soldier whose wife was a quilter. And in doing that, she reached to the bottom of that pile, she pulled out that one quilt and said, I have a very special quilt that I'd like you to see. It's called the Quilt of Valor, and it's made by a very special lady. And I think a quilter would understand the name. Her name is Georgia Bonesteel. Well, the mother was excited. The wife was excited. The soldier just looking at me. Yeah, nope. But, wounded or not, he was smart enough to understand, uh-oh, they're happy. So he picked that quilt. And Connie said he made up something about, yeah, I like the red, white, and blue and the pattern. He didn't know diddly about patterns, but the ladies knew. And the ladies understood, and he received that quilt. Well, at some point then along the way, I talked to Catherine about the wounds of war, because fair or not, the wounds that seemed to catch all the attention of the media back then were the amputees. We had a very large amputee ward that was full at all times, and we had a very progressive physical therapy lab that was continuing to make what they called C-legs, computerized legs, and they started to use more and more of them. Matter of fact, as I was flying here, I saw a young man with a brand new C-leg, and I thought, well, look at that. I remember those. But in doing that, that became the scene wound, if you would. People didn't see the TBIs, the traumatic brain injuries. They didn't see post-traumatic stress. Now, I had a psychiatric ward that stayed absolutely full to the brim, but that didn't also count for all the wounded that had trauma, that had many things going on. Well, because I had my own little TBI at that time, which was little, and and now has progressed, I've learned how to cope with it. People didn't know how to cope back then. So I talked to her. I also talked to Catherine because the majority of my deaths, 4 to 5 a week, were actually the sick soldiers. We had 6 intensive care units. We did over 200 surgeries a day. It's hard to imagine. But the majority of the soldiers that I lost every single week actually were sick or had been diagnosed with cancer downrange. So as the quilts grew and came coming in, I talked to Catherine and said, you know, we really need to place Quilts of Valor on all. We need to place them on seen and unseen wounds. And by that time, I finally got my atheistic doctor over the psychiatric ward to shut up and allow my chaplain to go in and give out the quilts. And they started to do that. Well, as time went on, I was asked to be on the board. And the Army said, well, you can be on the board, but you must not accept 1 penny. You accept 1 penny, you're going to jail. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want to go to jail. It was at that time I met Marianne Fons as we were starting to do more things, and I met a whole lot of other people as the organization was starting to grow in many ways. And as we did that, I was on that journey and stayed on the board for numerous years until my war deployments, and then my responsibilities as a colonel grew, and I had to let go of that. Yet Catherine and I had started a discussion one day in Delaware, and that discussion revolved around covering all those touched by war. I asked her, I said, do you think we'll ever do that? Well, Catherine, come on. Catherine had already been thinking. All those touched by war. She said, do you mind if I use that word? I said, I don't care. I just want to figure out how we can do something like that. Because what do quilts offer? They offer not only security, but comfort and healing. So how do we do that? How is that possible? Well, you're the result of that. You and many supportive people and organizations have made that possible to cover all those touched by war. And you're continuing to do it. I mean, look at the numbers that you keep talking about. These numbers are staggering, the amount of quilts that you now have given out, starting from 1 quilt. But you're the result of many dedicated women and men who've taken on the mantles of leadership and organization to grow an organization from 1 woman in Delaware, 1 chaplain to Walter Reed. And look at what you've become. I was told 11,000, give or take. So the amount of people that you touch is truly now staggering. And this only happens when the mission is important and when people get involved. So today you are truly the future of growing the mission of Quilts of Valor. And I have no idea where you're going to go, but it's pretty exciting to see. And in seeing that, I cannot thank you enough for all that you do and continue to do to grow Quilts of Valor. I can't thank you enough, not just for the fact that you make quilts, but that you organize and you ensure that there are people that can receive these quilts, that now it's real. You touch everyone, but you also get touched yourselves. So God bless you for continuing that mission. And I'd actually like Sue and Lori to come up, please. I got you, didn't I? You're in the back. I got you. I'm in no hurry. My flight's See, what you don't know, I retired in 2017. We have a maple tree farm in northern Pennsylvania in the mountains. And I'm pretty isolated. I mean, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, be honest. No, dear, you gotta come. Okay, well, I'm coming to you, then don't go away. Yeah. Pick her up. You gonna call my doctor? No, you go down there with her then, dear. That works. So, I'm pretty isolated, right? Except 6 months into retirement, my bishop called me out of retirement and said, I need you to just cover a church, just for a little while. That's been 7 years. Lutherans also cover Episcopal churches. The Episcopal bishop said, I need you to cover that parish too. So now I'm the only Lutheran / Episcopal in 3 counties in northern Pennsylvania and called out of retirement. But a little over a year ago, Sue called me up and said, would I come? And I was thinking, oh my Lord, nobody calls me that far out. But by her calling me that far out, of course, I was able to tell my doc, no appointments in September. I was able to tell my kids, no babies born in September. None of that. But they really made it possible, these two. So I thought, what can I do for them? And, you know, Army guys got boxes of stuff everywhere, right? And I thought, well, let me go look in this one box I haven't looked in probably in 15 years. And I thought, I wonder if there's anything from Walter Reed Army Medical Center in that box. The very last 2 chaplain coins from my office. Got the first, they now get the last. God bless and continue what you do.
With the Quilts of Valor Foundation Certificate of Appreciation presented to Reverend John L. Kallerson, United States Army retired, to recognize your generous support of the Quilts of Valor Foundation. Thank you, sir.
Oh my goodness, Chaplain Kallerson, that was amazing, and thank you so much for the coin. It is such a privilege. I'm a little speechless. So, wow, and what a great start, you know, to our organization. Just, you know, the dream sparked this. You continued the work, and you know, just how many lives have been touched. So thank you. And I think I'm going to have to put tissues at the podium. I think we're going to have a lot of that today. Oh, thank you. Marianne's ready for us. All right. Well, we have another great chapter of our history to celebrate. And I'm privileged to call to the stage Susan Gordon. And Marianne, are you joining her as well?
Yes.
Oh, my apologies. So, this is awesome. We get 2 ladies. We get Susan Gordon and Marianne Fons. Please come up. Thank
you. Marianne, whoops. I've broken it already. Marianne, next time make sure John Kallerson isn't speaking for us. What a great crowd today. I can't tell you how it fills my heart to see this many people. Back in 2009 when we started, we figured we started together about the same time. And so when we started talking about what we were going to say, we thought, let's just do it together. So much of it overlaps, and that way we won't be repeating each other. And John, I learned a lot about the years before 2009 today, so I thank you very much for that. Let's see, where's my little clicker?
There's the clicker right here, and you just click it.
Okay.
And Joe's going to help us over there, and it's a multimedia presentation. So bear with us as we transition.
We hope you'll enjoy learning about some of our earlier days. Many of you have never met Catherine Roberts. Well, I just hit the flicker and nothing moved. Am I going the right way?
There we go.
Got to point in the right direction.
We can see it right here.
So we wanted to introduce her to you today with this short video.
Full screen.
And sound.
When my son was deployed, I was always 10 seconds
Oh.
because I never knew what was going to happen.
Can we back it up a moment? Just a moment.
At that,
Quilts of Valor for combat veterans.
Okay, that's
I
good.
feel these quilts are the best quilts I've ever made because they comfort and honor my fellow Americans. During this special program, you'll see 3 Quilts of Valor take shape right before your eyes. You'll learn how a simple idea led to awarding more than 50,000 quilts to combat veterans from all branches of our military. You'll also see for yourself what a red, white, and blue quilt made with love and respect can mean to someone who has stood in harm's way. Let's first travel to Anacortes, Washington, and meet Catherine Roberts, whose son Nat was deployed in Iraq in 2003 during the first wave of fighting in the War on Terror. A nurse midwife by profession and a quilter by hobby, Catherine's vision of a post-deployment soldier wrapped in a comforting quilt was the seed that grew into what is now the Quilts of Valor Foundation.
when my son was deployed, I was always 10 seconds from panic because I never knew what was going to happen. At that time, we had just gone to war. We were in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the nation was, let's support our troops. And it was all about sending things downrange or to the theater. My thoughts were, I want to do something to help those who come back wounded. A quilt seemed the logical answer as to what could I do to help those who are serving in harm's way. And that would bring you comfort in the wee hours of the morning when you were wrestling with those war feelings. And so that to me made the most sense. And also being in the medical field, I know that suffering comes in many different ways. And that quilt is something tangible. It says thank you, an unconditional thank you for your service, your sacrifice, and your valor.
Okay, back to the slides.
Back to the slides. I started my Quilts of Valor journey late in 2008, and by the end of 2009, several of my friends, Betsy Podresnik, who's here, and Judy Manning, who's here, and I formed a local group and began to look for ways to raise funds. And by the end of the year, I had volunteered to be the regional coordinator. Now my region was, I understand we might be going back to some regional coordinators, but my region was Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And we didn't have state coordinators. So very quickly, Dennis Taylor agreed to take over Tennessee, and Annie Mixon became the state coordinator for South Carolina. It took a while to find somebody for Alabama, and North Carolina, but that left me really able to concentrate on Georgia. Had some wonderful experiences in Georgia. And it was shortly after that that they asked me to be the destination coordinator. But before I go there, let's see if I can move this ahead. Here it is. Marianne and I talked about the foundation we knew back in 2009, and there were two huge things that were different from where we are today. This is our mission. The early mission statement was to cover all those service members and veterans touched by war with wartime quilts called Quilts of Valor. And you never saw that mission without Catherine's tagline. This foundation is not about politics, it's about people. It was very important to her. I think I put myself out of, well, serving as state coordinator. Oh. So each week as destination coordinator, it was a job I loved because each week I would tell local groups where to send their quilts. Most of them were going to military hospitals at that time, many of them to Walter Reed, but they were also going to the front lines. It was a very different destination problem, if we call it that. Imagine every week you mailing out quilts through the APOs and whatever, overseas into other hospitals. It adds a lot of expense to what we're doing. But I loved it because I got to meet amazing people from other local groups, amazing representatives from other organizations, and even interact with people on the front lines. I received this letter from a Navy chaplain, a Navy captain at one of the mobile units in Kandahar, Afghanistan. My dear Mrs. Gordon, the worst day for our nurses was yesterday. Not because of the casualties we saw, the usual sadness that comes with each serviceman wounded, or the long, grueling hours spent saving the lives of everyone who got to us, but we ran out of quilts to give them. I cannot express to you what it is like to wrap a young man up and hand him to the Air Force doctors and nurses to fly him to Germany without the colors of his country draping him. We were heartsick. But today, like a gift from an angel above, your box of gorgeous, gorgeous patriotic quilts arrived, and we are, if only temporarily, restocked. Words cannot describe how precious these pieces of fabric, lovingly sewn together, have become to our staff of young nurses, doctors, and corpsmen. As you know, the fight is here in Kandahar, and we need quilts more than ever before. I am so grateful for your quilts. The nurses looked over each one, and there was a great deal of ooh and ah as they touched them. Thank you for knowing exactly what a quilt of valor should look like. I will write soon, I fear, and tell you when your blankets are distributed. Imagine, she's on the front line and she takes the time to write me a letter telling me how much she appreciated what we were doing. By now on my Quilt of Valor journey, I was feeling a bit of isolation. And I'm sure each of you has come to that stage in your journey. Like we were out there kind of producing on our own, but there was very little action between groups or interaction between groups. So remember, there were no policies, no procedures, no presentation guidelines, no membership, and just a fledgling internet presence. June Moore was the executive director from 2010 to 2013. And my background was in strategic planning. So I pitched to June Moore and Lori Cooch, thank you, and Catherine, the idea of getting together people from around the country who were doing the same thing, to learning from each other, sharing some best practices. What are you doing that works that we don't even know about? We haven't tried yet. And they said yes. So Karen Demery and Betsy Podresnik and I worked to make this happen. And it was while we were in Nebraska City that June told us that she was retiring. Well, that was a big surprise. This is the first volunteer meeting that we had in Nebraska City in 2013. Look at where we are today. 10 years later, we can fill a room. So many good things came out of that meeting. We were like first graders. We were sponges. We were so excited about meeting each other. It was the first time we'd actually come face to face with other people who were doing what we were doing, who were outside of our local group. And we probably shared too much, but anyhow, we shared, had great times, and we all had something we wanted to tell. What would help us be better at what we were doing and help us feel more part of the organization. I made lifelong friends there, including Marianne Fons. And although I was starstruck in the beginning, I soon found she's just a regular person. And she's so great to work with. One of the people I had the pleasure to meet was Diane Jagger from Utah. This was her car art. Now see, I'd never thought to do something like that. I think that's wonderful.
I gotta say, that's all we had for marketing at that time. A car.
She is so right. I don't know if you can you see the magnet on the car? It says wartime quilter. You still have one? Mine got appropriated off my car. I use them on my car because then I can always find my car in the parking lot. When we finally did initiate membership, we had a meeting in Nashville and a meeting in Las Vegas, just outside of both of those cities. But immediately when we said we were going to have membership, 2 people, one at each meeting, came up to me and asked me the same question. What does it cost to become a life member? And so off the top of my head, I said, $1,000. And J.P. Peglow from New York and Diane Jagger from Utah both sat down at those meetings and wrote a check. Those were our first 2 life members. Later the same year, Catherine asked me if I'd be willing to become, I don't want to skip this one. This was the planning team. And Karen Demery's here, so I want her to see her picture. Karen Demery, Julia Schroeder, me, Lori Cooch, who was the assistant director, executive director, deputy director at that time, Joyce Lundgren, who became our treasurer on the board, and Betsy Dresnick is not pictured there, but she was there and probably did something getting us all together, and of course Jean. Later the same year, I'm finding more slides than I knew. At that meeting, we met Anne Rehbein. She came representing the American Legion Auxiliary, and I think she really, looking at Marianne in this picture, I think she surprised her with the check for Under Our Wings. So some of us really are old in the organization, aren't we? This is the same year that Catherine asked me if I would consider becoming the executive director. Eric McCarty was Catherine's, probably still is, Catherine's son-in-law, and he was chairman of the board. And he called me and said, let's have an interview over FaceTime. I mean, this was before Zoom. And I said, no, I think I need to come to Ohio and meet you face to face. So Betsy and I jumped in my car and we drove to Ohio. And while Eric and I spent a day and a half talking about what our goals would be for the organization and what hopes we had for it, Betsy found Connecting Threads. At that time, they had a free room. I do not believe they have a free room, and if they do, it's probably called the Betsy Dresnick Memorial Free Room. Because when she picked me up that afternoon, the car was filled to the gills with black bags full of scraps from Connecting Threads. We didn't have to worry about our group finding fabric for a very long time. Well, and while working on this presentation, Marianne pointed out to me that not only did I drive to Ohio at my choice on my dime, but that I was interviewing for a job that did not pay and at which I would be expected to assume most of my expenses. So,
Plus he was a pilot.
Plus he was a pilot, yeah. Why wasn't he coming down to Atlanta to see me? But as Sharon Ledbetter taught me, once or twice in a lifetime, if you're really lucky, your heart and your head will tell you you're doing exactly what you should be doing, and you're exactly where you should be. And because of that, I said yes, I'd be the executive director. Well, see that got out. One of my first acts as executive director was to form a volunteer executive staff. And we met again in 2013 As Sharon explains it, I locked him in a room for 3 days in Nashville, and we planned, developed a strategic plan to take to the board of directors about where we saw the organization going, to make sure we had their approval and that they were on board for this. These volunteers, along with Jeff Thorne, did a great job just before Christmas. And again, all came on their own dime because this was in their hearts. It was what we wanted to do. If anybody understands that, it's the people who are sitting here today. Pictured in the back row are Jim and Joan Wobbleton, who are here. Terry and Judy Yates from California. Barb Connor, I got a story about Barb later on. Marianne Elliott, who with Marianne Fons, took over the newsletter. Julia Schroeder, Lori Cooch, me, and Sharon Ledbetter. Also, and Sharon's here today. Also, Jeff doesn't like to have his picture taken, but he likes to take the pictures. So we thank Jeff for all these wonderful pictures that are in here. Not pictures, because they couldn't make that particular meeting, were Di Richards from Indiana, and Betsy Podresnik from Georgia, and Jenny Manning from Georgia. So that was our first executive staff. A lot happened in 2013, and another high point of the year was when Army Ranger, I wonder if any of you remember this story, but our Army Ranger Josh Hargis was wounded in Afghanistan, and when his commanding officer was placing the Purple Heart on him in the hospital before they transferred him to Germany, they thought he was unconscious, and he raised his hand and saluted. Well, millions of people around the country saw this on the NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams. Many of them saw the salute. They saw the Purple Heart. I saw a Quilt of Valor. So the next day, I called a friend who worked for NBC News, and I said, I've got to speak with Brian Williams' producer. And his producer sent a news team down to Atlanta to cover one of our show days. They spent all day there. You know, you're about a minute and a half on screen. But they sent somebody down there and covered the story. And there was a follow-up story on Nightly News. Before I go to that, I want to tell you that that's the second picture is of Josh Hargis and his wife Taylor. That's 2 years later, and Josh walked from the entry of Fort Benning, where he had trained to be a ranger, Fort Benning, Georgia, walked the mile into the military museum.
On the CLs?
Yes, on his CLs. With his wife, and there's a small crowd behind there, and in that crowd is Barbara Connor. Barbara Connor became a big part of this story. Because here's what happened after the story ran on Nightly News. We've been going along all year at about 50 to 60 quilt requests a month. There were 499 the month of October when the story ran. And as you can see, we never went back down. And we discovered new audiences. Within 15 minutes of the story breaking, Barb Connor's phone blew up from all the people calling in. Quilters who wanted to know how to get involved, and also families of military who wanted to know how to honor their soldier, sailor, Marine, airman with a Quilt of Valor. And by the weekend, we had established 33 new groups on our Facebook page, on our website. We had over 400 new members on our Facebook page, and state coordinators were getting calls from their local television stations wanting to do local follow-up stories. Well, you know, sometimes you're just not ready for your publicity, for the good luck of your publicity. But very quickly, we understood that there were things that needed to change in the organization. When you're getting 455 requests in a month for quilts, it didn't work anymore to have a destination coordinator who just told you where to send quilts. Most of these were now becoming local, were becoming stateside, and we needed to have something in place that let us reach out to them in a more personal way. I have many wonderful, heartfelt events that I've participated in during the 2 years I was the executive director. And over here in the vendor area, in this area, Marianne and Sharon and I have some of our memorabilia that we wanted to share with you. I had the opportunity to award Quilts of Valor to the surviving members of the Flying Tigers. If you don't know who they are, you need to look them up. They went to China in World War II to help save China. The Montfort Point Marines, the first Marine company of African Americans, and the Toccoa Paratroopers. And you may not recognize their name, but you do probably know the Band of Brothers. That's where the Band of Brothers trained. These men represented the Second World War, my father's war. He was a POW in Germany for 9 months. And every time I award a World War II veteran a quilt, I think of my father. But it was in Adel, Georgia, when the moving Vietnam Wall came there, that I began to understand more about the Vietnam War. Because there, 50 years after the war, awardees would tell me, this is the first time anybody's ever thanked me for my service. I never had a welcome home until today. People told me not to wear my uniform off the base. It was a devastating realization of what had been happening back in this time. And I am thankful to all of you for what you are doing to correct that. Mistake seems too small, to change that time and help heal those wounds and comfort the Vietnam veterans. We thought it might be fun to share with you the first time we came to Paducah in 2015. Stand by.
With thanks to Jeff Thorne.
Yes.
The Quilts of Valor Foundation is trying to cover all veterans touched by war. It's not our job to define what touched by war means, because you can be touched by war in many, many different ways. The Quilts of Valor is trying to wrap these quilts around our veterans who fall into that category. My name is Harvey Mayhill. I am what's called the project specialist for the Quilts of Valor Foundation. It's not a job, it's not a hobby, it is a passion. And I think there's sincerely a lot of people are making quilts today to try to right the wrongs when the veterans were never welcomed home. Job. Doing their job, yes. And a very, very good job of it at that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the treatment to do what we're doing right now today.
Yes, yes. So my turn. That's my turn.
Before she starts, we awarded Marianne Fons
Yes.
and Mark at the opening.
Mark Davis, 20 years Air Force, and he was a refueler, so he wasn't in combat. He didn't think he deserved one, but you know, he took his life in danger over the ocean refueling fighter planes. So anyway, he naps on that quilt every day. So Susan and I have had such a good time. You know, we worked together like we were Fons and Porter. Yeah, and so I couldn't remember the years. I guess I need to do this. I couldn't remember my board years, so there's a quilt over there on the memorabilia table, and I dug that out, and it said what years I served. That's how I knew it got it right. But it all happened because I met Catherine Roberts in Houston in 2009. Quilts of Valor had a presence there at the International Quilt Festival, and we had talked on the phone previously for some little item in Fons and Porter's local quilting magazine. So I introduced myself, and I think she said, "I've been waiting to meet you." And you know, she's about 5'0", and I will never forget her looking up at me And we all say, you know, John, she kind of had a pixie dust that she would sprinkle on you. And even though there were many great works in the quilt world, you know, efforts for Alzheimer's research, Susan B. Komen breast cancer research, you know, I had participated in small ways, but this was the first time I said to someone, how can I help you? And so Liz and I had sold our business in '06. This was in '09. I was still required to be on public TV, but I didn't own a business, so theoretically I had time to help. So it was at that conference in Houston, that International Quilt Festival, that June Moore was there, and she mentioned to me that about 40,000 Quilts of Valor had been awarded. Now, listening to John, which was so fantastic because I knew some of the details about the early years with Catherine and Walter Reed, but I learned so much more. And so we know that those quilts in Walter Reed were probably not recorded. So there are many, many, many more than 40,000 at that time. But I am a person who loves my industry, the quilting industry, and always wanted to grow it and get more people to quilt for many reasons. And so I took that 40,000 and multiplied it times $250, which we thought at the time would be the cost, and it was $10 million. And I thought, my industry needs to understand the impact, the economic impact of these quilters. Now, all quilters buy fabric. These quilters buy fabric, they make quilts, they give them, they award them, and then they go and make more. And in Nebraska City, I met quilters, Diane Yeager. I mean, I met quilters who had made 100, 150, you know, and awarded these quilts, an unbelievable number, and you do the math. So that became my mission, and it was a beautiful mission because I felt at the time, you know, I used to say every man, woman, and child in America should make a Quilt of Valor, and think of the impact on my industry if that happens. Because if even just one or two of them find the therapeutic value of making a quilt and awarding a quilt, just think what that can do for the quilting industry. The idea for Under Our Wings popped into my mind very early on, way, way earlier than the foundation was ready for a national program. But my idea was if people who already know how to quilt would just take one person under their wing and teach them, think of that. And in practicing Under Our Wings, and this quilt that in the picture, my Valiant Eagle, I tried that out and thought people could make it. My rookie could surely make that in a day. But we learned early on, you know, the quilter does the cutting, the pinning, and the pressing. And the rookie just sews. And they see a block made, and they think, I made this. So anyway, the foundation wasn't ready. But that's me with Vietnam vet Dan Collins, my generation, the recipient of my first Quilt of Valor, Valiant Eagle. We ran that pattern in Level Quilting magazine, and I awarded it to him. And then I went back to his home a few weeks later to get a photograph to put in the magazine. And I'll never forget, I knocked on the door. It was summertime. He came to the door. And I had never given a quilt to a stranger, basically. I kept most of my quilts for classes and so forth, or for my family. And I said to him, I think about you a lot, Dan. He said, I think about you too, because I'm cold, because of Agent Orange. And I take a nap in the school every day. I did so many things during the years I was involved with Quilts of Valor. It's hard to remember, and thank you, Susan, for helping me remember. We're going to talk about it a little more in detail, the things we did. I recruited board members. I was, in those days when we were trying to get board members, and hats off to the current board members, if someone had a pulse, they were in. And would serve for free, of course. And you know, we didn't have Zoom. I mean, some of those, gosh, if you remember, some of those phone calls, boardroom phone calls, it was just really tough. My yoga class was one of my greatest, I'm not the teacher, I'm the student, but Michelle Leonard, who was one of our treasurers, I recruited her from yoga class. I said, we're looking for a treasurer, and she's a CPA. I said, but you're young, you won't have time. She said, I might have time. And she had experience with nonprofits. That's the kind of CPA work she did. She became our treasurer, and we learned from her that to be compliant for a 501c3 nonprofit, you have to have a physical address. Before that, our post office box moved to wherever our executive director happened to live. And so that's why Winterset, Iowa, where I live, is the national headquarters of Quilts of Valor, so we can have a permanent address. I met someone on the yoga mat who worked in corporate at Hy-Vee that you'll learn about later. Jerry Beam, who kept hearing me talk about Quilts of Valor, when she retired from her job in Des Moines, learned to quilt so she could make Quilts of Valor. She's made over 150 and awarded more than that. She's our local leader. I wrote stories for the newsletter. I edited the newsletter. I recruited Tony Jacobson, who's here, raise your hand, who is a wonderful graphic designer, and he agreed long ago to do the graphic design and is still doing it today. Coming from publishing, I wanted our newsletter to be professional because it reflects our foundation. I attended events, I made an award quilts, I convinced fabric companies to make red, white, blue fabrics specifically for Quilts of Valor. It's very hard to say no to me. Yeah, Catherine, so I just keep smiling. I remember that time in France when they weren't going to put my bikes on the train, and I just kept saying, oui, 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 and there it went. But probably the most significant things I did was produce 2 documentary specials for nationwide public television. And I have to say, all my best ideas are not my ideas. They're someone else's idea. I just run with them. But I had done an episode on Love of Quilting featuring the Quilt of Valor. And Andrea Coyle, who was our director and by that time was a senior producer at Iowa PBS. Iowa PBS is one of many affiliates around the country, and it's held in very high esteem in the public television world because their production values are second to none. And Andrea said, that would be a good idea for a pledge special. A pledge special is special programming that affiliates create to air during their fundraising. So they're designed to draw people to watch and to move people to donate to public television. And she said, this will appeal to quilters and also to anyone because it's a patriotic story. So I'm like, great, that sounds fantastic, let's do that. She said, well, if you would be the producer, it'd be more likely to get a green light. Well, I've been on camera for years, but I really didn't know what a producer did, but I said, sure. And so Andy and I co-produced the first Quilts of Valor documentary in 2012. And I'll talk more in a minute, but I also was charged with raising $20,000 for out-of-pocket expenses to pay for the crew's hotel and travel to go to the locations where the stories would be produced. So the first documentary was in 2012, and it was basically Under Our Wings in Action. So you see there on screen, I accidentally clicked, okay. So what we had was sewing sections that, how many have ever seen this? Wonderful. We had sewing segments that were taped in the studio, and so we had celebrity coaches and celebrity rookies. So you see Alex Anderson there on the left was a coach, and Dan Gable, Olympic gold medal wrestler from the University of Iowa, famous coach, became a rookie. And then we have Mark Lipinski. His rookie was Mary Lou Metzger, who was on the Lawrence Welk Show from the time she was a teenager. And then we have Eleanor Burns, and Heather was her, Anderson, was her rookie, a military wife, an Army wife, and then I was the host. And the thing for me, it's all about the friendships we make when we're working together. So Alex Anderson, of course, I knew Mark Lipinski, I knew Eleanor Burns, but they were basically competitors at Fons and Porter. It's a friendly competition in the quilt world. And so I remember being really nervous calling Alex on the phone and asking her to come to Des Moines, Iowa to appear in this program? And she said yes. And Mark said yes, and Eleanor said yes. And they didn't really know what they were going to do when they got there, but they came for no money. You know, they did it because I asked them, and we became friends because of that. And then later I did things for Alex. I mean, I would do anything for them. So, so that program, Iowa Public Television offered it to all public television affiliates nationwide, and it aired nationwide over and over and over again. I can't tell you the number of people I've met that said, I saw that program, I started making Quilts of Valor. I saw that program, I learned to quilt so that I could make Quilts of Valor. As an industry person, that is music to my ears. It pledged well. People reached into their pocketbooks and they pledged public television. It was so popular, Andrea Coyle said, let's do it again. And so Eleanor Burns had some health problems, she couldn't come, and these are screenshots, it's the best I could do to get an image up there, but Alex and Mark and I made a Quilt of Valor together in the studio, and then the topics went out to other stories, and this time I think I only had to raise $15,000 for out-of-pocket expenses because they went to Seattle and they went to Nebraska and they went to DC to get stories. And so my yoga mat friend who worked at Hy-Vee connected me with the decider at Hy-Vee. I got $5,000 from him, and he connected me with Casey's convenience stores. I got $5,000 from them, and then Ann got me $5,000 from the American Legion. And I meant to say, when I had to raise the $20,000 before, we had sold our company, and I was the ad seller for Fons and Porter's magazine, because I'm hard to say no to, right? And so I was really worried that if I went to Moda or any one of the big companies and asked for $10,000 or whatever, I would get in trouble. You know, like John, we don't want to get in trouble. And so I made really hard work out of it. So I got $1,000 from 20 different companies. And most of those companies, the money person didn't even need approval for $1,000, where if they $5,000, they would need approval. So that's how I managed to do that. So the stories that we were told in the second documentary in 2015 were 4-H students. Some of you have seen this. There's 4-H students making Quilts of Valor in Nebraska and going to the Nebraska State Fair. I was in Seattle doing a presentation for Renina, I think, and there was a lady in the back that had this golden retriever puppy at her foot's side. And so I struck up a conversation. She raises puppies that go on to be trained as service dogs. Well, I knew she was a quilter because she was there, and I was like, have you ever made a Quilt of Valor that gets awarded to the person that got your puppy? And she said, no, but I know somebody and I'll do that. So that story was covered. And then in Iowa, and I didn't get to go to Seattle, I didn't go to Nebraska. I wasn't on camera, so you know, there's no money for the person that's not on camera. And so I did go to northern Iowa, where we interviewed 2 women who served in World War II. And then the final story that you see in this picture was at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in DC. And you can see Joan there on the bottom right, Jim is there, Walt Davis, my brother-in-law, I recruited him, of course, Marianne Elliott, I'm sure you can recognize others that are there and the recipients. The amazing thing about Iowa Public Television, it's Iowa PBS now, when they flew out to DC, there was a huge storm, and they weren't sure they were even going to get to fly in there. And they got there and went early that morning where the awards were going to take place. The veterans were going to wash the wall, and there was no water. The water had been turned off at the memorial. But because of Jeff Thorne's amazing photographs taken at previous events, and everything's wet because of the rain, they didn't actually wash the wall that day. But the segment was produced, and it's really moving. So, these are some of the companies that I recruited, hit up for, but you know, all I had to do was the math to show them the importance of helping me. the Quilts of Valor quilters. And these are just ones, I kind of dug around to find the names of them, but it's so neat to see now more and more partners are involved with Quilts of Valor. Are we doing okay on time? We're almost done, yeah. So when I think of my years of service, I remember feeling really grateful to Quilts of Valor Foundation, because believe it or not, I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert. I'm a patriot, but I'm not a flag waver. And Quilts of Valor gave me the opportunity to do my national service in a way that I was comfortable doing, and in a way that enabled me to grow my industry, an industry that enabled me to raise my family as a single mother from age 39, all at one time. So, the other benefit was, the joy of working closely with selfless people like Susan, June Moore, Anne, Rehbein, Sharon, Sue Reich, Ginger, Suzanne, Betsy, Joan, Jim, Walt, Marianne Elliott. Competitors like Alex, Eleanor, and Mark, who became close friends. The list is long, and we remain friends forever. Standing side by side with a leader like Anne in this photo from 2018 stirs me with altruistic pride. Before we hand the mic to Anne, we'd like to touch on a few of the major things Susan and I remember from the time we spent working together. I'm going to start with the lapel pins. And when Susan was director, we were in Ohio, I think, and we had no money, no membership fees, nothing. And she proposed that we would have these lapel pins made. And we're sitting there like, oh, I don't know. It's going to be about $350, right, to get these pins made. She said, well, what did you say?
I'll pay for them myself if we don't have the money for it, and if we sell them, great, you'll
You get
reimburse me, and if you don't, it was my contribution.
That's what it was like. National Sew Day.
Betsy Podresnik originated National Sew Day. Again, it was before Zoom. You probably participated by Zoom in National Sew Day. This was before Zoom, and we drove around all day in the car, pulling names out of a big barrel, everybody that registered, and then one of us would call them and let them know that they'd won a prize.
And guess who got the prizes? Who rounded up the prizes?
That's right.
We had a sewing machine.
The first year we had a sewing machine.
Yeah, they can't say no. A professionally designed monthly newsletter, and hats off again to Tony for that. And coming from, I won't say there's never been a typo, but in publishing, you want a quality publication, and we decided early on it's not going to be that long, and it's beautiful. So I edited it. On my last, before I completely retired, I was the proofreader for the newsletter.
Well, what we realized, especially when those numbers started going up, is we were in compliance with federal regulations. We didn't know. People were collecting money on their own and putting it in their bank accounts. We hoped they were going into bank accounts that said Quilts of Valor, but they weren't sending it to national. And they weren't 501c3 corporations. You had to be part of the Quilts of Valor Foundation to be in compliance.
So if they were given a letter saying you donated this money, it wasn't really a legal charitable contribution.
That's right.
The icky parts. Yeah.
And we needed to have insurance in every state. You're covered because that's what National does for you. Our bank accounts are covered. We had a treasurer at one time who wanted to hold back. You would send all your money in, and then we would take out 10% for overhead. Well, Catherine just nixed that before it got off the table. So, as you know, you get good bookkeeping at no cost. That's absorbed by National. But these were all things that weren't in place. We had people having raffles for quilts. They weren't raffling Quilts of Valor, but they were raffling quilts to make money. We found out in some states, you gotta be licensed to do that. And that costs money. So we had to kind of whip people together. It was the Wild West. We were all doing our own stuff.
And what's something I didn't know, because this was my first involvement with a nonprofit. Now that's my life, you know, with the Iowa Quilt Museum and the Iowa Theater. But you know, in order to fundraise in each state, there's a license that must be filled out. It's so complicated that an ordinary person can't do it. So these were the hard lessons we were learning. Policies and Procedures Manual. That's what Bond does.
Yes.
And so I didn't know what policies and procedures. I'd never heard of that before. In fact, I never heard of strategic planning for and so, but I'm like, it's a publication. I know how to see a publication from the writing stage to the publication stage. And we would be on the phone hours of working on the language and the organization.
Then we'd send it out to Sharon to kind of proof and give feedback because she looked out for the quilters no matter what.
Extra eyes.
Yep, it took more.
Your assistant executive director, Sharon, that better. Membership structure should have probably been up there, but I mean, it was so painful transitioning to membership. I'm sure people quit over because here, just think of all these quilters who are using their own money to buy the fabric, to make the quilts, and now we want to charge them a membership fee to do what they've been doing for free. It was terrible. It was terrible.
But as a marketing person, we quickly recognized that we needed to give them something for their $5.
Yeah, a pin.
So we gave them a pin, which cost pretty close to $5, but it meant you were a part of the organization. You were officially in the foundation.
And I remember talking to Ann somewhere along the way about the American Legion Auxiliary, you know, where you have, you know, here's a long-standing national foundation where there's membership. You have to be a member in some way. Professional leadership development. I was on an island in Wisconsin, Rock Island, it's a state park off of Wisconsin, and they have a lighthouse there where people are docents for 2 weeks at a time and wear, you know, 19th century clothing all. And I was there, and a man and his wife were the docents, and I said, well, what do you do in real life? He says, I advise nonprofit boards of directors. I'm like, will you please give me your contact information? That was Mitch Vasos, who I think 3 different times we came up with the money for him to come and talk to the board.
And the last one?
The last one, this will take us all back. 2014, the 100,000th Quilts of Valor ceremony at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And we were fortunate to be there, and you can see John is saying the invocation. Marianne Elliott is there, and her husband on the left, who really made it happen there. And Susan awarding John and Connie Kallerson. Woohoo for Connie, the quilter. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. And they're John and Connie with Catherine Roberts. So, you know, I think I forgot to say, but I can say now, well, here's today's arithmetic. I updated this yesterday, $107 million in change that you have spent. But when I met Catherine in Houston, I forgot to say that she told me her dream was that Quilts of Valor would be a household word. And I think it's safe to say that we have made that dream come true. She always said, you know, this foundation is not about politics, it's about people. But we also forged this sentence: national service can be as complicated as giving your life for your country, or as simple as making a quilt of valor. I think that's it. Thank you. Yeah, there you go.
And again, it's not nearly enough, but on behalf of the Quilts of Valor Foundation, we give you both a certificate of appreciation to Marianne Fons, Quilt Board Member Emeritus, to recognize your generous support. And thank you for helping with the beginning, and to Susan Gordon.
Thank you, Susan and Marianne. Wow, what a chapter. You know, just those foundational pieces, you know, thinking about the committee meetings I'm in with you guys, those projects, and that you guys started the bones of that, and just it's, yeah, just so inspiring. So thank you both. So, well, we're ready for the next chapter in our history, and I'm excited to introduce Ann Rehbein. I am lucky. I get to work with Ann as our board treasurer, and she's been a good mentor to me. So, Ann, please come on up.
Thank you, Lori. Well, gee, not only do I get to follow Reverend John, but I get to follow Marianne and Sue. I don't think that's fair. What an inspiration. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So my active involvement with Quilts of Valor began in 2012 when I formed a statewide group with the Iowa American Legion Auxiliary. The group held a sewing day, and I thought, I wonder if Marianne Fons would come. And as you've seen, she did, and we have been friends ever since. I did attend that meeting in Nebraska City because I had some expertise in nonprofit management and was able to provide the foundation with suggestions on state registries and some other nonprofit topics. If you know Marianne Fons, then you know she can be very persuasive. And that led me to becoming the executive director when Susan decided to retire. I'd like to talk a little bit about the people I worked with during those years. My predecessors, June Moore and Susan Gordon, deserve most of the credit for structuring the backbone of what Quilts of Valor is and always should be. Policies and procedures were in place, and NEON was the membership tool. Ginger Fondren, who is here somewhere, where are you, Ginger? Right there. There she is. Ginger Fondren agreed to become the assistant director, and Jackie Dudek, the membership goddess. And this is us up early one morning. We're at the Houston Quilt Festival, all working hard in our pajamas and our witch's hat because it was Halloween. But Ginger and Jackie worked tirelessly, giving of their time and talent, all for the good of Quilts of Valor. Jennifer Keltner became managing editor of Threads in January of 2016. She was the former editor-in-chief of American Patchwork and Quilting magazine and was then the publisher and chief visionary officer at Martindale and Company. And she and Tony worked hand in hand getting the newsletter out. And we thank you for that, Tony. I know there were some hair-pulling days there. Michelle Leonard, who is pictured in the middle there, became treasurer with the third retirement of Joyce Lundergan. Yeah. We just kept having to have her come back in those early days. And I'd just like to mention a few of my executive staff because I'm taking a little thing from maybe Wreaths Across America where when you place a wreath, you say their name and they are never forgotten. So if you hear their name, once more, perhaps they'll never be forgotten either. So other members of the executive staff were Elaine Gassett, Deanna Bryce, Karen Weber, Deborah Coppa, Jeff Thorne, Suzanne DiCarlo, Deb Kaldenberg, Myra Cotton, Sandra Chambers, and Dawn Gifford, who was the IT director. And with her expertise, we developed a new website, and Trello was introduced as the new tracking system because we had no way of tracking all those quilts. So we developed that new tracking system. And then also joining us through the years as executive staff were Janice Lewis, who is here also, Ann Bryant, Sharon Bullman, and if I've forgotten anyone, I apologize. Marianne talked about a permanent address for Quilts of Valor, which we discovered we had to have for many, many reasons, most of them legal reasons. And so the Iowa Quilt Museum graciously rented us a closet for $1 a year. And I never paid that bill, so yeah. Anyway, we were very grateful for that because it provided us the legal, physical address that we needed. They also, the Quilt Museum, that picture on the right is one of the two award ceremonies that the Quilt Museum has hosted. So we are very grateful for their partnership. During those years, there was tremendous growth, and with it came associated growing pains. 1,600 new members were added in 2016. The executive staff did their best to coordinate and expedite membership, quilting, long arming, and much more. And as you can see, the number of quilts reported for 2015 was 18,772. By 2019, that number had grown to 33,375 per year. That's per year. So we had 3 conferences during my tenure. The first was co-sponsored by OSQE, and it was called the American Quilts Expo. And it was held in May of 2016 in Des Moines, Iowa. And OSQE sponsored the whole thing. Quilts of Valor did not have to pay a dime for meeting rooms or stage presence or exhibit space. The conference preceded the expo, and each day started with an award ceremony, followed by speakers and breakout sessions, a private showing of Quilts of Valor 2 that was produced, as you've heard, by Iowa Public Television, and Andy came and answered questions. So that was quite interesting. We got the background of how you produce a film like that. The other presenters at that conference were Marianne Fons and Tony Jacobson. Tony, if you don't know, also designs quilts. And he did a trunk show, I believe. And a space was provided for a QOV booth. Quilts were awarded each day. We had an ice cream social with Marianne Fons and Eleanor Burns. And a quilt auction was held with small hangings that were donated by known quilt artists. Plus, we took a bus trip to Winterset to tour the brand new Iowa Quilt Museum, the John Wayne birthplace, covered bridges. I'm sure you've heard of covered bridges in Madison County. And we met our new board president, Sue Reich. In 2017, the annual conference was held at the Elegante Hotel in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And that top left picture is Mary Ewing and Joanne Authors, who were our special guests from the Canada Quilts of Valor. They had a great time. A highlight of conference was when the microphone was passed from hand to hand down every row of participants. Each told his or her own QOVF story. All were enjoyable, many were amazing. Author Elisa Sherman clued us in on the importance of self-care to keep our hearts, minds, and body in balance in service to our mission, and also on using social media for success. And Beth and Jean Sizemore described the steps to winning a $5,000 grant. 2018 Quilts of Valor Conference was held in Myrtle Beach, North Carolina, South Carolina. It's one of those Carolinas. Right, Jim and John? No. So I apologize. I apologize. Liz Nolan, who was a board member at that time, chaired the Star Spangled Benefit Dinner and auction, and you've heard mentioned John Rowdy Oxley, who shared his story of receiving a Quilt of Valor and his special angels. The long-awaited book, Quilts of Valor, a 50-state salute, was unveiled. And there in the background, you can see many of the quilts that were reproduced here. The book includes the history of QOVF, a quilt representing each state, and beginning, intermediate, and advanced patterns to encourage more quilt making. And also at this conference, first ever salaries for the executive staff were announced. Yeah, that was a fun time. Fun time was had by all. If you were there, you remember. We also welcomed new board members, Marianne Elliott, Tony Jacobson, and Mary Wilson Kerr, and later Mary Persine. Over the years, many companies have partnered with Quilts of Valor by having specials on their websites or making products available, such as these Andover labels and the QOV reference guides. AccuQuilt, which is an Omaha company, displayed 8 quilts in their gallery for 3 months and then sponsored an award ceremony. They've partnered with QOV several times, and Pam Heller has been a speaker at several conferences and events. Northcott has printed the brochures for many, many years and have produced panels and fabric for QOVs as well. There have been numerous companies involved over the years, and you saw that on one of Marianne's slides, and we are always grateful for their support. One of the really fun aspects of being executive director is the people you meet and the opportunities you have. Outreach to fellow quilters and the general public at national level quilt shows is an excellent way to increase recognition of QOVF and our mission. Several multi-show businesses generously offer free booth space at their events. AQS has been primary to offer booth space, and Original Sewing and Quilt Expo and Mancuso are all well known to quilters nationwide. We also exhibited at the National 4-H Conference, where I got to meet the 4-H, I guess a mascot, I'm not sure. But it was a fun conference. We've exhibited at the American Legion National Convention and Quilt Festival in Houston, just to mention a few. 2 events that always bring back good memories are the Nebraska, I'm a slide behind here. That slide shows some of the places that we've exhibited. The one on the right is at Quad A, which Walt Davis, is he president yet, Marianne? Do you know? He's going to be in, all right, thanks. Anyway, Walt Davis was very instrumental in getting us that space, and we met a lot of interesting people there. It's a very interesting conference. It's way above, our brain power, because it's all aviation and warfare and that sort of thing, but we're grateful to Walt for getting us that space. We even had an Australian soldier come up and talk to us quite a bit about Quilts of Valor. In Norway, yep. So it was good. You just never know who you're going to meet at an exhibition like that. So 2 events that always bring back good memories. the Nebraska Honor Flight for women veterans. A dinner was held the night before with Hot Lips Houlihan. Yeah, that's her on the left, as a guest speaker, and all of the women veterans were awarded a Quilt of Valor. And I don't know how many were there. There must have been over 100, I'm sure. It was such a great evening, such a great evening. I've met a lot of distinguished people in my life. I've had a lot of great opportunities. But the ones that have my highest respect are the Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. Through the hard work of my friend Rowdy, John Oxley, he and I attended the Medal of Honor Tribute to Value Weekend in Dallas, Texas, where Suzanne DiCarlo helped award Quilts of Valor to these heroic men. QOVs were awarded to 10 Medal of Honor recipients in October of 2018 at a luncheon, which also honored American patriot Lee Greenwood with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his tireless efforts on behalf of those who serve. It was indeed a time I will never forget. Being an executive director is hard work. You are responsible to your board of directors, to your staff, to the 50 state and regional directors, but most of all, to the 10,000 members who look to you for guidance and support. As with life, you take the bad with the good and you move on. I'm glad I had the opportunity to serve Quilts of Valor in this capacity, to make the friends I have, and to hopefully have left it as well as my predecessors did. I would like to thank my traveling companion for all these years and my friend, Ann Crawford, for her dedication and willingness to try all these new adventures with me. And I want to thank all of you for any part you have played in making this happen. Thank you.
Certificate of Appreciation to Anne Rehbein, Executive Director, 2016. Whoops, I made a mistake. I'll get a new one to you. To 2019. Thank you for your generous support. Thank you.
Again, another great chapter in our history. You can see where we grew, awarded more quilts, added more supporters, and just grew as a community. So thank you, Anne. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, just gonna check in on time a little bit. We're running a little bit late. We've had a lot to celebrate this morning. I think that's a good thing, right? Yeah, let's absolutely. So we're going to go ahead. I'll share my chapter. Again, we have something special after that. We have a few orders for the day, and we'll just be behind probably about 15 minutes if that's okay with everybody. But I think it's important to take that time to really celebrate, you know, where we're at, where we've been, and just a special morning. So, well, as you know, I joined in October of 21, so really my chapter with Quilts of Valor is the present, you know, the last few years. And this morning when I said I was really excited to see you all, I really meant it because they've been some tough years for us. They have. And so, sorry, I'm just gonna compose myself. I said I wouldn't do this. But, yeah, when I came on board, you know, our country was really in a weird spot. You know, it was the pandemic, and our country across the board was experiencing it in different ways, and different protocols in different states, and people making, you know, decisions on how to best handle it themselves. And that can really affect an organization like this. But what happened is you all stayed steadfast. You all stayed here and you pivoted. I think that's probably the biggest word for the last 2 years is pivot. You know, not only, you know, in our lives and our country, but also with Quilts of Valor. And let me tell you, you guys are rock stars at pivoting. So when I came on board, you know, we were very much in a virtual world, you know, at that time, meeting online. Oh, thank you, Suzanne. So we were connecting online. And you all were making awards happen as they needed to where you were at. I remember this year I got to travel to Norfolk, Virginia, and be part of awards with the Patriot Triangle Quilts of Valor group. And at the VFW that we were awarding the quilts, you know, they were pointing out where they had the drive-up awards, where they stood, you know, how they figured that out. And it was just, I mean, it was just so inspiring to see that they made it work. And, you know, even 2 years later, where we're at from that time, it's hard to believe that that happened. I know I was sharing with some quilters that I remember standing at my local Joann's store, masked up, 6 feet apart, on the line, and you had to get there early because that line was gonna fill up, and you had to wait in line for about 20 minutes for the store to open. And I mean, it would snake all the way down the shopping center. And they'd only let so many people in at a time. So you had to be organized. You had to have your list, you had to go in, get what you need, and come out. So again, during that time, we just kind of all figured it out and made do. So, and I want to thank you all for pivoting, for being present. Our membership numbers, they dipped a little, but it stayed really steady. We were around 9,000, 9,500 at that time in 2001. And I think that's incredible considering what we were all going through. So, all right, so let me check in with my slides. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about pivoting during the pandemic. I know you guys did mail awards, Zoom awards. You know, just made it work any way that you could. And again, thank you for your strong commitment. This picture actually is a little more recent. It's from the Daytona AQS show this year. But as you see, you know, we're still in some areas and some folks trying to figure out how to make those awards comfortable and meaningful. And you know, again, this chapter is about rebounding growth. Over the last 2 years, we've added over 1,000 members. Last month, we hit the 11,000 member mark. Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons that we hit that. So, a big part of it is your commitment, you know, sharing in your communities, doing what you do. You know, our volunteers, our committees, our staff, our NAMs, you know, our new system, a lot of it has come together to take us to that mark. And what's exciting is we hit that number last month, and usually our numbers dip a little as we're renewing for the month, you know, and at the end of the month, we really look at that number. But, you know, 2 weeks into the month, we were still over 11,000 members, so. And then we started to rebound on Quilts of Valor awarded. I know, Anne, in your tenure, some of the peak numbers were over 33,000, and we're headed towards that direction again, which I think is exciting. The last 2 years, we've awarded over 30,000 quilts, and we're on track this year to award more. So, thank you guys for making sure that has happened. You know, in our chapter, we continue to grow our volunteer committees, the volunteer power, and you all are making a big difference. A big thing that's happened in this chapter is NAMS, our new nomination management system. You guys remember Trello? Okay, who does not want to remember Trello? No, Trello's a fine tool, but we had the opportunity to implement NAMS, and that was something I believe was started in your chapter, maybe Anne, or even after you, but it's taken several years to coordinate that, but it's definitely been a great way to connect with leaders, do training. We have real-time data. You instead of having to come through the Trello board. Data is powerful. It tells our stories. It helps us talk to our funders. It helps us, see where we're at. So I'd like to take a minute, the NAMS committee, if you're here, if you can just stand, please. Dombeck in the back. We have Suzanne DiCarlo, and am I missing anybody? Oh, Tammy. Absolutely stand up, so thank you. These folks, I want to say there's a team of about, 10 of you? I think there's a big team. 10, yeah. And they were meeting weekly for a while, and they did over 40 trainings. They trained over 400 group leaders, just an amazing effort. And my husband's in IT, so he says, you should know the value of that work. And they really, hundreds of thousands of dollars that we would have had to pay to somebody else that they've contributed. So thank you. Thank you. Another committee that's kind of helped us really expand and get the word out is the Outreach Committee. Ladies, if you can stand. Thank you, ladies. We have Maggie Plinke, Ginger Fondren, Nancy Can, and Sue Reich. And they came on about the same time I did, and they've been a godsend because they organize our booths at over 50 shows across the U.S. You want to talk about sharing the message exponentially, that's an amazing way to do it. We've seen a lot of benefit coming back in and know that contributes to our numbers. You guys also help us with some different partnerships. The Homes for Our Troops, we award a Quilts of Valor at every key ceremony. They also connected us to Letters from Home. Who's excited about Letters from Home later? And Letters from Home, through their performances in each 50 state, they have awarded a Quilt of Valor and helped raise awareness at each one of those shows. So thank you, ladies. So this isn't a new idea, but we're revisiting it, and it's created a lot of support and growth across the country, and that's our regional coordinators. And if you would stand, you guys are going to get your exercise before lunch. We have Donna Raberton from Mid-Atlantic. You guys are going to test me on your regions today. Karen Dimmery from North Central, is that correct? All right, and then Jan Copeland, remind me, you are Great Lakes, that's right, I know it's in the center. And then Suzanne, you are South Central, is that correct? What's that? Southern, okay. Very good, but appreciate your leadership. Meet with you guys at least 2-3 times a month, and you guys are helping us tackle kind of the next phase of growth. How do we address under our wings? How do we handle the Long Army Committee? What are things that we can create for our group leaders? Training, you're informing the training committee. So just wonderful mentors and valued resources, so thank you. Our regional coordinators also support our state coordinators. So I know we have a number of you here today, our state and district coordinators. Suzanne, you're, yeah. No, please stand. I'm just giving you exercise. As of this summer, we had added over 100 state and district coordinators. It had really grown, and so it continues to grow. And just want to thank you all for your service in that role. The Education Committee is an exciting committee. They're working on training. Yeah, she's ready. I love it. So the Education Committee stands, Susan and Suzanne again. Thank you, ladies. But I think, as we look at our future, training is a big part of that. How do we get consistent training? How do we get everybody on the same page? Over 11,000 members. As of last month, 665 groups. We've added over 100 groups. How do you get everybody moving in the same direction? And that's going to be a big piece of that. So thank you. The Under Our Wings Committee. So what's exciting about this was hearing about the origin, Marianne and Susan, from your era, and seeing, you know, how that's grown through the years, and you know, it was just fun because we're in meetings, we're talking about that next phase of growth. How do we formalize a little bit more of that? How do we look at safety guidelines? How do we, you know, partner more with other organizations? And so that committee's really been exploring that, and it's been exciting. So under our wings, folks. Awesome. We got Ginger, Denise, Jackie, and Suzanne. So thank you guys. Yeah. And one of the groups that I get to work with that's, you know, a privilege to work with is the board. We did introduce them earlier, but just want to recognize, you know, what they're contributing to. And this board is interested in being a partner with everybody. You know, they've, some of the board members have started joining the committee meetings so we can get that dialogue going, and I think we're going to have some really positive results from that, so. All right. You know, we've continued to expand partners. We've worked with some long-term partners. Our brand, so, you know, I think it was mentioned earlier that Catherine's dream was for our name to be, or, you know, for Quilts of Valor to be a household name, and we are definitely there. Which makes it kind of interesting to do some trademark management, but we're not going to talk about that today. So, but yeah, these are the folks that we've continued to work with: Janome, Northcott, Superior Threads, the National Grange. Their Granges across the U.S. Award Quilts of Valor on our behalf, and many Granges fundraise and give supplies back to local groups. Authentically American, Dean Wegner, the CEO, will be here tomorrow to tell you more about that partnership, but he's helped with fundraisers through merchandise, you know, national TV coverage. American Quilt Society continues to be a great partner, you know, particularly this year with our quilt show, with the quilts being displayed at the Daytona, Branson, and Paducah shows. Original Sewing Quilt Expo, this year they offered us booths where people could actually sew blocks. Anytime we get somebody to make a block, they get to find out what we do, right? How good that feels, and also helps us really boost our numbers on the blocks. Missouri Star Quilt Company, we were the recipient of their auction this year. And so I know Linda Martine, you got to go, and Connie Richards, you guys got to go to the auction there in Hamilton, got a tour, and I was jealous I couldn't make it, I had another commitment. But I'm glad you guys had that experience, and they donated generously. And then we continued our partnership with AccuQuilt. And this year, they're really promoting our block of the year, and we're seeing a big bump in our numbers, so we appreciate that support. Some of our new partners, Letters from Home, we'll talk more about them later. I'm excited they're coming. We talked about homes for our troops. So the Fat Quarter Shop, the last 2 years they've had the Liberty Box for sale, and we've gotten the maximum proceeds that they wanted to donate. But about a month ago, I got a hold of our contact there. I got a hold of Jocelyn, and I said, hey, just last call in the conference, do you have anything you want to put in the bags? And she said, yeah, we'll take care of you. We'll send you something. And I don't know if you saw the bag of notions in there. Oh my goodness, they really went above and beyond, and we also have some great door prizes too tomorrow. But any of these partners, if you get an opportunity, please let them know how much you appreciate that, how much it really helps you in your work, you know, in fulfilling our mission. The Flag Shirt Company, they are another apparel company that we've done fundraising with. And then Golden Peak Media, they had Stitch Fest this year, kind of their usual fiber show, but also adding a sewing component, and gave us booths. And they've also given us space in their publications. So, and then the Heroes Honor Festival, we were privileged to participate in the first one last year. That was an event primarily geared towards Vietnam veterans in the Daytona, Florida area, where they had a huge 2-day event, and we got to award quilts and have a booth. So, you know, lots of growth, and there's not enough time, I think, sometimes to tell everybody about our mission and enlist their support. During the 2022, as you guys saw last night, the All-Star Book. Did you guys enjoy the quilts in the museum? Yeah, they were amazing. Yep, and I don't know why that slide says that, so we're just going to move on. You know, sometimes tech doesn't work. And we've had a couple key awards, you know, over the last 2 years. The first one is our 300,000 quilt. Craig McKee, he's a news anchor in the Cincinnati area. Michelle Nelson ensured that he was awarded that quilt. Thank you, Michelle. And he was great about continuing to tell his story, you know, receiving a Quilt of Valor and promoting it in that region. And then this summer, we awarded the 350,000 Quilt of Valor to Representative Jason Crow in Colorado. And he was an Army veteran. And pictured in that group is representatives from 3 groups in the Denver area. And Sandra Lazaroff on this side of Representative Crow, she's the Colorado State Coordinator, and she wasn't able to be with us here today. But a lot of good leadership in my home state, so. Yeah, so those are some of the highlights of kind of where we've been in this recent chapter, you know, what we've been doing presently, and then, you know, think about what's next. And really, I think the sky's the limit. I mean, we are, you know, we're positioned again, I think, to grow, enlisting more people, more groups, wrapping more service members and veterans. That is the most important thing. And I just want to thank you all for what you do. And it was interesting because recently somebody was asking me about Quilts of Valor and how I got involved and what it was like. And I said, well, you know, I'm the newbie to the group. I didn't have any prior experience. I started a long arm business 3 years ago and started quilting for another charity with my guild, you know, another nonprofit. And my good friend, she was long arming for the guild in Denver. And I think she did 60 quilts in 2 years. She was a rock star about it. But I was just quilting along, kind of knew about it because of Nancy's involvement. And then one day out of the blue, I saw the job announcement, and I thought, that looks interesting. And I was like, well, I wonder, you know, and my creative brain was like, I wonder if they need, let me do some research. You know, I don't think I'm interested, but let me. And I started working through it, and I started talking to my husband, and he goes, you need to apply. He says, you just need to see where this goes. And so it was just kind of a spark, and here I am. And I gotta tell you, you guys are the best community. Because it's hard coming in when you're new, and it's hard to fill the shoes of leadership that have come before you. And just, you know, knowing more about our story today and working with you all, it's a tremendous community. And my friend, when I was relaying the story, I said, you have to understand something. It's not just a community, it's a family. It is a family. They show up time and time again, you know, do things selflessly. They work through weather issues, conflict, but they show up and they're there for you. And I'm just privileged to be a part of this family. So. Before we break for lunch, we have a special letter from Catherine Roberts I'd like to read to you. And I have to put my glasses on because I don't want to mess this one up. And then I have to find the letter, which I specifically put up so I would not lose it, but here we are. I've got the letter. Catherine was not able to be with us today, but it was really important to her to share a message with you all. And I am honored to read her words. The letter starts out as 20 years of healing for those touched by war. QOVF started out as a simple drive to support the men and women whose lives who have been touched by war. It is this drive which has brought you all here today. I would like for you to understand where this drive came from. It came from seeing men and women whose lives have been impacted by war, get no recognition, and even less healing. From Vietnam through Iraq and beyond, QOVF works to avoid repeating history by giving recognition and healing to the men and women who went into harm's way, irrespective of politics and creed. Post-traumatic stress does not care about affiliations or identities, and there's no simple cure for it. I do firmly believe, however, the quilts we sew can absorb and transmit healing When I would speak to groups of veterans, I would talk about the magical healing bubbles that we infuse into the quilts we made. When recipients got their quilts, these healing bubbles would burst open and start the healing process. The Quilts of Valor Foundation took off thanks to people's generosity with their time and talents. People like Marcia Stevens, a talented and influential long armor who partnered with me, a novice in the world of quilting and piecing. I'd like to recognize Chaplain Kallerson, without whom our partnership with the VA medical centers would not have been possible. It was Chaplain Kallerson who gave us the term touched by war when we were struggling to define who was eligible for a Quilt of Valor. If PTSD didn't discriminate, then neither would our healing. We resolved to include those who had psychic unseen wounds in addition to physical ones, an inclusiveness that has been part of QOVF's DNA since the beginning. I want to leave you with some thoughts about these healing quilts and their intended recipients. To my mind, there is no standard type of Quilt of Valor quilt, as there is no standard recipients. Our recipients come from all walks of life. Some may be patriotic, others may not. We owe it to the men and women we serve to craft healing first above all else. I would like to think that this model of healing war wounds could extend to other fiber arts beyond quilting. I am so proud of those of you who have picked up the QOVF banner and continued through the years. It's powerful and meaningful work that transcends politics and time. It is truly about the healing of fragile human beings and to recognize people who might otherwise go overlooked and forgotten. Sincerely, Catherine Roberts. Very unexpected of you, Gary.
Again, on behalf of all of us, thank you. We're so glad you accepted the leadership for these 2 years. And so on behalf of us, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Wow, thank you, everybody. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a breath, and then we're going to go to our first session. Yeah, what a morning. What a morning. So just a few housekeeping things. When you leave for lunch and your name